The story begins in a middle school where a new teacher is taking attendance. He starts calling out names, Iguchi, Kikuchi, and then comes Sumiko Tamugi. And just like that, we meet our main character. Tamugi answers the roll call, but there's something unusual. White chrysanthemums are placed on her desk. Now, if you don't know, white chrysanthemums symbolize sorrow and are commonly used at funerals, so naturally the teacher is taken aback. When he asks about them, Tamugi simply apologizes and says she'll remove them. But as she moves the flowers, the class erupts into hushed laughter, mocking her for reasons that aren't immediately clear. Something's off with how the class treats her. The teacher senses the strange atmosphere as well. Later, we see a discussion about bullying, and guess who brings it up? The same teacher. Let's call him Hitogoroshi, or just Hito. Hito asks a fellow teacher about bullying in Tamugi's class after noticing the vase on her desk. His colleague confirms it. It's bullying. But this leaves Hito confused. When the other teacher asks which student Hito thinks is being bullied, he replies, Tomugi. And at that moment, his colleague reacts with an unexpected lack of surprise. This catches Hito off guard, so he asks if the teacher already knew about her situation. The teacher denies it, but casually mentions her timid personality, adding that kids can be especially cruel to someone like her, an easy target. Hito doesn't push the conversation further, but something about this whole situation doesn't sit right. On a rainy day, we see Hito running through the downpour, searching for a place to take shelter. Luckily, he finds one, and to his surprise, Tomugi is already there. At first, while wiping his glasses, Hito didn't recognize her. But once he puts them back on, he realizes it's Tomugi and greets her. She responds politely, though her tone remains neutral. To start a conversation, Hito makes a casual comment about how bad the weather is, but it's clear Tomugi isn't particularly interested. The two of them sit in silence, watching the rain continue to pour outside. As Hito looks at her, he starts debating whether this is the right moment to bring up the bullying. As her homeroom teacher, he feels responsible and wonders if he should ask her directly. While he's lost in thought, Tomugi calmly opens her drink and starts sipping. Hito watches her for a moment, and then, unexpectedly, she offers him some. He hesitates before politely declining, his face slightly flushed. Tomugi resumes drinking while Hito stays quiet, gathering his thoughts. He knows this is his chance. If he doesn't ask now, he might never get another opportunity. Finally, he gathers his courage, calls out her name, and when she looks at him, he carefully brings up the vase incident, indirectly addressing the topic of her bullying. Hearing Hito's question, Tomugi casually replies that Mukai-san was the one who placed the vase on her desk that day. Hito looks confused. This wasn't the answer he expected. Seeing his reaction, Tomugi elaborates. Mukai-san has a crush on Kimura-san, but Kimura-san likes Tomugi. Since Tomugi rejected him, Mukai-san got angry. Hito is even more puzzled. He doesn't understand why Mukai would be upset. If Tomugi had accepted Kimura's confession, Mukai still wouldn't have had a chance. But regardless, Hito understands the situation now. Even so, he points out that the other students also seem to be turning their backs on Tomugi. Tomugi then explains that Mukai isn't just some random classmate, she's popular and comes from a wealthy family. Because of that, it's not surprising that the other students naturally side with her. To them, ignoring Tomugi is just the easier choice. Hito takes a moment to process this. He hadn't expected such an insightful explanation. He comments on her sharp observation, but Tomugi dismisses it with a shrug. Trying to comfort her, Hito confidently tells her not to worry. He'll take care of the situation as her teacher. But instead of relief, Tomugi simply gives a small smile and, in a casual tone, says, "I'm used to it." Her response catches Hito off guard. He was expecting gratitude, maybe even relief, but instead, it feels like she's already given up. Eventually, the rain stops, and the two start walking together. As they walk, Tomugi suddenly asks why Hito became a teacher. Hito gives a simple answer. His parents were teachers, so he naturally became interested in it. Tomugi responds with a quiet, "Really?" Then, without warning, she reaches out and touches Hito's hand. Hito freezes, eyes widening in surprise. He turns his hand slightly, staring at the unexpected contact, his face turning red. Flustered, he asks why she did that. But in that instant, Tomugi's entire demeanor shifts. Her tone drops, her expression unreadable. "Hito-sensei, you're such a liar," she says with an unsettling calmness. "You don't care about being a teacher at all, do you?" Hito is left speechless. Before he can even respond, Tomugi cheerfully calls his name one last time and walks away, leaving him standing there in silence. Later that night, at Hito's house, we see a cat waiting by the door. The moment Hito arrives, he greets the cat warmly, crouching down to pet and play with it. For a while, he seems relaxed, but something is bothering him. After that, he turns on the TV, hoping to distract himself. But no matter how much he tries, his mind keeps drifting back to what happened with Tomugi. It's not the fact that she held his hand that unsettles him. It's what she said to him. He replays her words over and over in his head. "You don't care about being a teacher at all, do you?" The more he thinks about it, the more it gets under his skin. Because the truth is, she wasn't wrong. He realizes he became a teacher for no particular reason. There was no passion, no grand purpose behind it. It just happened. And now, as he reflects on his daily life, he admits to himself that he's been living each day without any real direction. He lets out a quiet sigh, sinking further into his thoughts. "A middle school girl saw right through me in seconds," he thinks to himself. And that realization? It's embarrassing. Hito wakes up the next morning to find his cat staring at him, waiting for a response. He absent-mindedly pets it, still lost in thought. At school, Mukai approaches him with a serious expression and calls his name. She tells him she has something important to report. Tomugi is involved in compensated dating. Hito is taken aback. He stays silent for a moment, but Mukai continues, explaining that she saw Tomugi late at night in the entertainment district with an older man. From the way they interacted, it was clear that he wasn't just a friend or a boyfriend. There was something more going on. She looks at Hito intently, waiting for his reaction. Although Hito finds it hard to believe, Tomugi doesn't seem like the kind of girl who would do something like that. He reassures Mukai that he will look into the matter himself. Satisfied, Mukai leaves, while Hito watches her go, deep in thought. He suspects that Mukai might be lying to tarnish Tomugi's reputation. But his doubts are shaken in the next scene. Tomugi is walking through town with an older man. The man looks exactly like a stereotypical NTR villain, shady, well-dressed, and up to no good. Hito happens to be nearby and witnesses the scene with disbelief. The old man gestures toward a direction as he chats with Tomugi. Strangely enough, Tomugi appears happy while talking to him. However, the man's face and body language give off a bad feeling. His intentions are far from good. Observing from a distance, Hito is certain that this man isn't Tomugi's parent or relative, but before jumping to conclusions about compensated dating, he decides to follow them. He trails them for a while until they arrive at a train station, and then Hito sees something that leaves no room for doubt. The old man places his hands on Tomugi inappropriately, touching her in a way that makes Hito's stomach turn. But Tomugi doesn't resist. She doesn't even seem bothered by it. Then, the man hands her an envelope thick with cash. Tomugi accepts it, her face slightly flushed. Hito watches everything unfold from a distance, and at that moment, reality hits him. Tomugi is, without a doubt, involved in compensated dating. Hito, still in shock, staggers to a nearby bench and sits down. His mind is blank. For a moment, he considers pretending he didn't see anything. Like a coward, he thinks about turning a blind eye and walking away. This moment serves as the first subtle hint to the audience that there's something deeply flawed about his character. A red flag that will only become clearer with time. Lost in thought, he struggles with what to do next. Then, Tomugi's harsh words resurface in his mind. "You don't care about being a teacher at all, do you?" The memory stings, but it also fuels him. Even if he isn't the perfect teacher, abandoning a student's problem isn't right. Motivated by this thought, he decides to intervene. As he looks back at Tamugi and the old man, an announcement echoes through the station's speakers. An express train is about to arrive. Passengers are advised to stand behind the yellow tactile paving for safety. In that moment, Hito sees something that makes him hesitate. Tamugi and the old man embrace like they are parting ways. The sight disgusts him, and in an instant, his resolve wavers. Why should I get involved? He thinks. He's a piece of shit anyway. Why pretend to be a good teacher now? But before he can leave, something completely unexpected happens. Tamugi, her expression turning cold, suddenly shoves the man. Hito watches in stunned silence as the old man stumbles backward, right onto the train tracks. His body teeters on the edge as the express train barrels toward the station. And then, impact. The man is crushed instantly. Blood splatters across Hito's face, the metallic scent thick in the air. He closes his eyes in horror, trying to process what just happened. But before he can react, something even more grotesque occurs. The force of the impact sends the old man's severed hand flying, and it lands right on Hito's head like a thrown ball. The train screeches to a halt. The station descends into chaos. Hito stares at the lifeless hand in shock before his stomach turns, and he starts vomiting. As he struggles to regain composure, he senses a presence watching him. He looks up and sees Tamugi. She has seen everything, but instead of looking afraid or panicked, she laughs. Hito, still gasping for air, stares at her in disbelief. The sight of her laughing at such a horrific scene is more terrifying than anything else. And then, police officers rush toward them, their footsteps growing louder. The scene shifts to a flashback from 10 years ago. Hito, a young and relatively new teacher, walks to school, greeted by one of his students. He greets her back before noticing something unusual, earrings on her ears. He calls out her name, Tomita. Tomita turns to him with a curious expression. Hito points at her earrings, raising an eyebrow. Realizing she's been caught, Tomita blushes and lets out a nervous chuckle. As she removes the earrings, she admits, if the school finds them, they'll just confiscate them. She hands the earrings to Hito, expecting him to keep them. Curious, Hito asks, "Did you buy these yourself?" Tomita shakes her head. With a small smile, she reveals that they were a birthday gift from her boyfriend. Hito looks at the earrings in his hand before returning them to her. "I'll pretend I didn't see them today." Tomita's face lights up. Without warning, she hugs Hito in excitement. They continue walking together, and Tomita, still smiling, asks, "How do you know my name? You're new here, right?" Hito sighs, looking a bit embarrassed. He explains that he lacks confidence in his teaching skills, and because of that, he decided to at least memorize all his students' names, including their first names. Tomita listens intently. Then, with a bright smile, she says, "You're the ideal teacher." For a brief moment, those words fill Hito with warmth. But that warmth is short-lived. The scene abruptly changes. A police van is parked near a bridge. Sirens wail in the background. Hito, now frantic, rushes toward the scene. He spots another teacher and immediately asks what's happening. The teacher, looking grim, responds, "It's Tomita! She jumped into the river!" Hito's breath catches in his throat. Suicide? The teacher shakes his head. He doesn't know the details, only that Tomita is gone. Hito stands frozen, unable to process what he just heard. Then, another scene from the past surfaces. The same old man from before, the one from the train station, appears in the flashback. He's speaking to Hito, inquiring about Tomita's situation. He mentions reports that she was being bullied. Hito hesitates. He looks away. Then, with a weak voice, he mutters, "I don't know anything about that. I'm just a newbie teacher." The flashback shifts again, to Tomita's funeral. Hito stands among the attendees, his heart weighed down by sorrow. But then, he overhears whispers. Some of Tomita's classmates are standing nearby, mocking her. They say cruel things about her, laughing as if her death means nothing. Hito clenches his fists. At that moment, everything becomes clear. Before he can react, the flashback ends. Hito wakes up in his bed, breathing heavily. His forehead is damp with sweat. A soft meow brings him back to reality. His cat is waiting for him, looking up expectantly. Shaking off the lingering nightmare, Hito gets out of bed. He takes a deep breath and heads to the kitchen. It's time to make breakfast. At school, Hito is approached by a fellow teacher who greets him and inquiries about a rumor circulating among the staff that Hito had witnessed a tragic accident. The question catches Hito off guard, momentarily filling him with panic. Struggling to maintain his composure, he quickly explains that a drunken man had lost his balance and fallen onto the tracks. The other teacher simply nods in acknowledgement, unaware of Hito's internal turmoil. Later, in the classroom, Hito conducts the morning roll call. He goes through the names methodically until he reaches Tsumugi. The moment he utters her name, his breath hitches, his eyes widening slightly. Memories of the previous night flood back. Across the room, Tsumugi raises her hand, waiting for his response. Hito remains frozen for a brief moment, his mind racing. Then, forcing himself to regain composure, he resumes the attendance as if nothing happened. The next scene shifts to the school rooftop, where Hito stands alone, lost in thought. The weight of everything he witnessed lingers heavily on him. Then, a voice disrupts his solitude. "Why did you lie to the police?" Hito turns sharply. Tsumugi stands a few feet away, looking at him with a calm, almost amused expression. She steps forward, her gaze unwavering. "You told them the old man was drunk and lost his footing, but that's not what happened, is it? You saw everything." Her casual tone unsettles Hito. Before he can respond, she continues, "I pushed him." A chill runs down Hito's spine. The way she says it, so direct, so unaffected, makes his stomach churn. For a moment, he doesn't react. Then slowly, he exhales and mutters under his breath, "So, it wasn't just a dream." Tsumugi tilts her head, momentarily caught off guard. "Wait, are you being serious right now?" Hito remains silent, then, as if shaking off the weight of the moment, forces himself to act normal. He sighs and finally responds, "I have a duty to protect my students. That's why I told them what I did." Tsumugi watches him intently. Hito continues, his voice steady but his hands clenched. "When I saw you with that man, I was shocked. But when you pushed him, I told myself it must have been self-defense." For the first time, Tsumugi's expression softens. Her cheeks take on a faint blush, and after a brief silence, she murmurs, "Thank you for that." Then, with a small smirk, she adds, "I never imagined you thought about me so much as my teacher." Hito, despite himself, feels a strange sense of relief. But then, before he can react, Tsumugi reaches out and gently touches his cheek. For a fleeting second, the moment feels almost intimate, like something out of a romance scene. But if you were expecting that, you'd be mistaken. With a smirk, Tsumugi leans in slightly and says, "In the end, you didn't do this for me. You did it for yourself." Hito's face stiffens. She continues, "Think about it. If an investigation happened, you'd be dragged into it too. You were there when it happened. You're my homeroom teacher. If things got messy, wouldn't you be held responsible?" Her words land like a cold blade against his skin. "So really, you were just protecting yourself." Hito doesn't respond. He simply stares at her, the weight of her words sinking deep into his chest. Hearing this, Hito instinctively pulled his hand away. A flicker of fear crossed his face as he scrambled to defend himself. "How can you even say that? There's no way I'd think like that." His voice wavered slightly, betraying his unease. But Tsumugi didn't flinch. With the sharp gaze of a mastermind protagonist, she tilted her head and simply asked, "Is that so?" Then, with a calm yet cutting tone, she called his name, "Hito. You acted like you did all this for the sake of your student, but deep down, you didn't actually care, did you?" Hito's breath hitched. His fingers curled into fists as desperation crept into his voice. That's not true. What you're saying makes no sense. Before he could finish, Tamugi grabbed his hand. Hito froze. Her eyes locked onto his, piercing straight into his soul. Then, with a knowing smirk, she murmured, "It's written all over your face." Hito's body tensed as she continued, "Your thoughts. I can see them. So troublesome. In the end, it was just some sleazy old man who died anyway." His expression faltered. His eyes widened as if he had been completely exposed. But just as the tension reached its peak, Tamugi let go of his hand and giggled. "Just kidding." In an instant, her sharp demeanor vanished, replaced by an innocent, almost sweet expression. She looked up at him with playfully wide, adorable eyes, as if nothing had happened at all. As the realization hit, Tamugi suddenly gasped and blurted out, "Oh no, the next class is about to start." Without wasting a second, she turned on her heels and rushed away, quickly apologizing to Hito while promising that she'd catch up with him later. Hito remained frozen, still processing everything she had just said. But just as she was about to disappear from sight, Tamugi abruptly stopped. With a bright, cheerful smile, she glanced back at him and casually remarked, "By the way, I don't mind if you tell the police the truth about what happened." Then, without another word, she walked away, leaving Hito standing there, completely stunned. Later, while teaching in the lab, Hito found himself unable to shake off his thoughts about Tamugi. Her behavior gnawed at him, the way she seemed to peer straight into people's hearts. It wasn't the first time either. The way she spoke, her expressions, it was as if she could see through him entirely. Doubt crept into his mind, but he quickly shook it off, muttering to himself that the whole idea was ridiculous.
As the scene shifted, Hito was seen walking through the school campus when he suddenly heard someone calling Tamugi's name. His eyes followed the sound, leading him to the basketball court, where Mukai and a few others were playing a match. Tamugi, however, looked hesitant, clearly uncomfortable being there. The game continued, and Mukai seized an opportunity, jumping to score while deliberately knocking Tamugi down in the process. Tamugi crashed onto the court, and Hito, watching from a distance, saw her tear up from the impact. The coach rushed over, asking if she was all right and suggesting she take a break, but Mukai smirked, casually dismissing her with a mocking remark about her being clumsy. However, to everyone's surprise, Tamugi wiped her tears away, straightened up, and firmly insisted on continuing the match. Hito observed silently as the game resumed, his gaze fixed on Tamugi. Mukai, seeing Tamugi still in the game, decided to take her down again, convinced she was nothing more than an idiot who didn't know her place. As Mukai made her move, she aimed to hit Tamugi in the face with her elbow. But this time, Tamugi dodged effortlessly, her focus completely locked into the game. Mukai's eyes widened in shock. Before she could recover, Tamugi struck back, hitting the ball with precision, directly at Mukai, sending her tumbling to the ground. As Mukai lay there stunned, Tamugi slowly stepped toward her, an eerily calm yet chilling expression on her face. She tilted her head slightly and muttered, "Oops, my foot just slipped." Everyone watched in stunned silence as Tamugi raised her foot, as if about to kick Mukai in the face. The tension was suffocating, Mukai's eyes filled with panic, her body frozen in fear. But at the very last second, Tamugi's foot landed just beside her head, slamming into the ground instead. The court fell into chaos as everyone rushed toward Mukai, who had burst into tears. The air was thick with unease as they checked on her, while Tamugi stood there, completely composed, her expression unreadable. Hito, watching from afar, could only wonder who exactly was Tamugi. In the staff room, Hito sat in silence, his mind replaying Tamugi's words about the police incident. The weight of the situation bore down on him as he picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over 110, just one tap away from making the call. But at the last second, hesitation gripped him. Doubt crept in, was this truly the right thing to do? Before he could decide, a sudden shout of his name jolted him from his thoughts. He flinched, looking up to see a fellow teacher approaching with urgency. Confused, he asked what was wrong. Without a word, the teacher thrust his phone forward, insisting he take a look at the news. Something serious had happened. Hito took the phone and scanned the article. The headline hit him like a thunderbolt. The old man who had been killed by the train, the very same incident from the first chapter. had now been identified as a suspect in an unsolved case from 20 years ago. His name had finally been revealed, Tetsu Kasuya, 56 years old. As Hito read on, his expression remained unreadable, but internally, a storm was brewing. The article detailed the case, known as the Gemini Incident, a decades-old investigation that had gone cold, lacking the evidence to identify the true perpetrator. But now, a confession had surfaced, a written statement from the Gemini killer himself. The moment Hito's eyes landed on the words Gemini Incident, his fingers tightened around the phone. A subtle tremor ran through him, though he masked it well. Beside him, the coach let out a low whistle, shaking his head at the irony. So the man who died right in front of you, turns out he was a murderer from a cold case. He exhaled sharply before adding, in the end, it was divine punishment. But Hito didn't react. His gaze remained fixed on the screen, his mind somewhere far away. He was drowning in thoughts, piecing together fragments of information, trying to make sense of it all. The coach noticed his silence and, sensing something was off, called his name. Later that evening, Hito sat before the TV, the soft glow of the news screen illuminating his face. But he wasn't really watching, his mind was still trapped in the revelation from earlier. The Gemini Incident. The Gemini Killer. The old man's suicide note. His thoughts raced, forming connections he hadn't considered before. The note left at the train scene had now been confirmed to belong to the infamous Gemini killer. And within that note, something had been written. Something crucial. But before his full thought process could unfold, the scene abruptly cut away. The setting shifted to a quiet, somber graveyard. A weathered tombstone stood tall, worn by time.